an assistant professor at UC San Diego, and I'm a public health person, so I'm probably the least technology-focused person here. And I don't have a company, and I don't have a demo, unfortunately, but I do have an important public health problem in need of a technology solution, and that's what we're going to be exploring today. And that's the application of blockchain technology to potentially combat counterfeit medicines. If you were here for yesterday's opening remarks or some of the sessions that came thereafter, MedX has actually been pretty invested in the idea of exploring blockchain for healthcare solutions. So we had a workshop on Wednesday where we explored different applications of blockchain technology. And if you don't know what blockchain technology is, don't worry, we'll go over that in probably slide 6 or so. But essentially, we're looking at this technology as a way to facilitate solutions. And one of these solutions is a space that I'm heavily invested in, and that is drug safety. So we'll be going over that. And what we'll do is we'll first talk about counterfeit medicines. So for those of you who don't know what this public health problem is, we'll provide some case studies and some descriptions. We'll provide some information about why the supply chain is vulnerable to these particular incursions, I guess you could say. What a pharmaceutical blockchain could actually look like, not a supply chain, but a pharmaceutical blockchain. And then we'll talk about policy and future direction. So does anyone know what this is here? Any oncologists in the room? Yes. You don't mind me calling you out and asking. Is it a popular oncology drug? Probably maybe 1, maybe 3 or 4 as far as top selling drugs in the US, right? Okay, thank you. So what this is not is Avastin. This is actually not Avastin. What it is a $2,000 vial of cornstarch. So it's a counterfeit medicine. Essentially, what was replaced with the active ingredient is cornstarch because, again, it's a biologic and it's easy to replace a biologic with sterile water or things like that. And what happened was this was a 2012 incident where the FDA detected counterfeit Avastin in the US drug supply chain. The medicine, or the cornstarch, whichever way you want to look at it, came from a very complex global trade that originated first in Turkey and then went to Switzerland, Denmark, the UK, and finally entered into the US drug supply chain. In total, there were about 1,000 notices that went out to different clinical practices in the US saying that those clinical practices may have purchased counterfeit Avastin and actually administered it to patients. There was about 12 prosecutions. Most of these ended up with some sort of probation or forfeiture. So for example, one guy lost his Aston Martin, too bad for him. And there was one person that actually went to jail for about 1.5 years. He was a physician. And these are the points, because we actually looked at the FDA warning notices, and we mapped them out using GIS, ArcGIS, to determine where those notices were sent. So you can see kind of the geographic distribution. I just was kind of curious how many clinics were located around here. So I did a mapping, and there's about 2 or 3 in the Santa Clara area. So those are actually also ones that got notices. And if you're a patient there, you may have been at risk of exposure for this counterfeit medicine. So this case study of counterfeit Avastin is just a microcosm of a much larger public health problem that we've been dealing with for quite some time, and that's the global trade in counterfeit medicines. Counterfeit medicines have penetrated all aspects of the drug supply chain, including hospitals, including distribution networks, including global health programs like the Global Fund, and including unregulated settings like night markets and bodegas where people purchase drugs not in the controlled supply chain. The estimates are around 10 to 30% according to the WHO in low to middle income countries. But in actuality, we have really no idea of the scope of this problem because it's really hard to surveil for criminal activity. People aren't very transparent about their criminal activity, but it's been estimated in the billions of dollars. And the most important thing is it's a form of pharmaceutical globalized crime because so many different actors are involved. And in fact, a lot of organized crime has been involved in this because they want to diversify their portfolio. And because, as you see from the Avastin case study, the prosecutions aren't that harsh. One of the things that's concerning is that fragmented regulation and the use of technology can actually facilitate this type of crime. Our separate studies, more public health studies, more epidemiological studies, have shown that actually from 2009 to 2011, there are approximately 1,500 breaches, individual breaches in the controlled drug supply chain around the world. So this is a mapping of some of the countries most heavily impacted. And of course, this is potentially just the tip of the iceberg because this is information that's generated from pharmaceutical security companies that may be surveilling for their own medicines instead of other things that are going on. So what's the public health implications of this? Well, a lot of you may have heard of the recent death of the artist Prince, and he was actually a victim, of course, of counterfeit medicines as well, because the medicine that he ingested was a counterfeit version of a prescription opioid that was laced with fentanyl. And so this is an individual case of a person, passing away from ingesting counterfeit medicines. But from a larger public health perspective, there are there's a high prevalence of counterfeit medicines that have been detected in Southeast Asia and Africa, specific to antimalarials. And the problem with this is this can also lead to antimicrobial resistance, because if you're not having the appropriate amount of active pharmaceutical ingredient, you can actually lead to more antimicrobial resistance, which is a huge global health problem. And the case study for Avastin, which we published on pretty extensively, is concerning because, one, it's the most heavily regulated drug supply chain in the world, the US. We still had a counterfeit medicines penetration. And even though I showed you that map before, those are just points where a notice was sent. We actually have no idea how many patients were impacted and what the scope of the problem actually was. And just as an editorial, if you're a counterfeiter, a cancer patient is your perfect customer because they have a low survival rate to begin with. There's no surveillance associated with that, and it's a very expensive drug as well. So it's kind of the mix of a perfect crime. So that's the concern we have. So enter blockchain, technology that could potentially address this vulnerability that we have from a patient safety and public health perspective. First, if you don't know what blockchain is, I encourage you to look it up on YouTube. It's kind of an interesting concept, but essentially, it's a shared distributed ledger. So instead of when we have a financial transaction, I have my ledger, I credit and debit it whenever there's a transaction between the two parties. It's a ledger that's shared amongst everyone. And then as the transaction kind of goes through the process, you can add information to that blockchain. So you can add information, and when you add information, it's authenticated. So you know that when someone adds that information, it's actually coming from them. And then an added value is, since everyone can see it, there's transparency, and also you can ensure that if there's a transaction that doesn't look legitimate, you can actually kind of tease that out and detect it. So I'm hoping you guys can see some of the parallels to this counterfeit medicines issue, but essentially, we can use blockchain to make the drug supply chain more transparent, accountable, and also make it more trustworthy for patients. So we can do that through a few different models that we're exploring right now, again, in partnership with IEEE and other academic partners. But essentially, you can validate these transactions as they move through the drug supply chain. So in that sense, what we want to do is we want to actually create a model that can enhance counterfeit medicine surveillance, because we really don't have that now. We want to be able to generate data that can predict if a counterfeit medicine may have infiltrated the drug supply chain. And we actually also want to use it as a post-market surveillance shared ledger to efficiently effectuate recalls and product safety notices. So that's kind of the end point of that as well. So, drug supply chain, it's just like a blockchain as well, because as you go from the manufacturer to the wholesaler, to the warehouse, to the pharmacy, and then to the end user, that's a blockchain in itself. And with authentication, we can actually determine if that drug went to its intended customer and didn't have any incursions associated with that. So some of the other things beyond just that blockchain component is that blockchain also has the potential to integrate with other anti-counterfeiting technologies like mobile phones, like RFID tags, things like that. So it's an open platform. Again, it can track and trace. So we track and trace a lot of the products that we have as consumers now, like foods and things like that, but we don't track and trace our medicines. So as a patient with blockchain, you could actually track and trace and make sure that drug didn't come from Turkey. That would be the idea. Interoperability is also a very important component in regulatory harmonization, because we have many different countries associated with the global drug supply chain, but they don't all agree on the same standards. So if we have an open standard, then that can facilitate, again, everyone being on the same page and that information being standardized. And regulatory harmonization, again, is a critical component there. And the most important thing, because I'm more of a policy guy than I'm a technology guy, than I'm a public health guy, so I'm really outside of my realm here. But the most important thing is we actually have policy infrastructure to support this idea. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So in 2013, after a lot of the controversy associated with compounding and the meningitis outbreak, the US Congress passed what's called the Drug Supply Chain Security Act in 2013 again. And what that does is it requires us to have a national track and trace system so that everyone can track and trace their medicines, at least within the US. One of the main components of it is that we have to verify the legitimacy of the product, which includes detecting counterfeit medicines. We have to notify when there's illegitimate products, everyone in the supply chain, and we have to facilitate the recalls. So again, we're mapping to the ideas that were expressed about blockchain. Another thing that's really interesting is FDA is now exploring the development of standards. So again, an open standard would probably facilitate this process quite a bit. The full implementation, so we're not safe yet, is about 10 years away. This is a negotiated process through manufacturers and distributors and regulators. So there's a lot of room to actually insert the blockchain methodology or technology into this as a critical solution for implementation. So again, when we map this out, a lot of the key requirements for the Drug Supply Chain Security Act actually are directly applicable and can be enhanced by blockchain technology. I won't go through those, but we can tease that out in Q&A, although I'm sure you'll have a lot of Q&A for the rest of the presenters. Some of those presentations were really amazing. And so the bottom line here is that we have a problem. We still have a problem with global counterfeit medicines. Essentially, any drug supply chain is vulnerable to the weakest point in that drug supply chain. So if the drug is coming from Turkey, and basically what they did in Avastin was they pushed it through all these different companies so it would look like it came from the UK. And so if we have a blockchain technology that actually authenticates where that medicine is coming from, then it can be detected and prevented and make sure that consumers don't actually get exposed to this particular threat. So again, blockchain represents a potential solution to address this. It can ensure interoperability, verification of information, and increased transparency. Those are all important components. So the next steps for us, because we're at the very beginning of this, is really doing more research, more multidisciplinary research. So the team that we're working with is really a group of engineers, people from pharmacy, myself in the policy or global health space, and looking at the technical aspects of blockchain and applying it to the drug supply chain. We also need to figure out how to develop robust partnerships across all these different stakeholders. And that's the other good thing about blockchain is it can engage a lot of stakeholders all at the same time. And we also need to figure out how to make blockchain a core component of implementation of this federal law called the Drug Supply Chain Security Act. So finally, I just want to, because I'm in academia, so I have to acknowledge my funders and things like that. So the American Cancer Society funded a lot of the research we did on Avastin. It's a really amazing case study, something that you should look at when you think about drug safety. It's a sentinel event. The MEDEX staff, of course, helped us a lot and supported these efforts, especially with the workshop. And then our collaborators, Kevin Clausen, who's in the room right now, and Alpesh Shah, primarily setting this up and helping us get this word out. So hope you'll join us in developing this solution. I wish I had a demo for it, but hopefully we will sometime soon. Thanks.